In this video, we will review the normal anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system. We will begin with the lungs. The lungs are found in the pleural cavity within the thoracic cavity. They are separated into subdivisions called lobes. There are 3 lobes on the right side and 2 lobes on the left side. The lungs are surrounded by a system of membranes called pleura. These consist of squamous epithelial cells on a bed of collagenous and elastic connective tissue. They are called serous membranes because they secrete a thin, watery fluid. One of these membranes is called the visceral pleura. This is the one that covers the surface of the lungs. The other is the parietal pleura. This one lines the thoracic cavity. Between the 2 membranes is the pleural space. This contains a small amount of pleural fluid. How do the lungs stay inflated? This depends on 2 factors. One is the pressure in the pleural space. This pressure is less than atmospheric air. This pressure difference helps to overcome the elasticity of the lung tissue and keep the lungs inflated. The other factor is surface tension. Surface tension is present at the inner alveolar surfaces. Surface tension in the alveoli is very low due to the presence of surfactant. If surface tension were high, the lungs would collapse, and this is the major problem with premature infants that are born without enough surfactant. The surface tension in their lungs is very high, so when they try to breathe, their lungs collapse. Next, we will look at the respiratory airways. This is how air is delivered to the lungs. Air enters via the nasal fossa and then enters into the pharynx. These are known as the upper respiratory passages. The nasal cavity also communicates with the sinuses. The sinuses are air-filled spaces within the skull bone that also act as resonance chambers. Next, the air goes through the larynx. The larynx is found in the throat. This is also where we find the vocal cords. The trachea is next. The trachea begins at the end of the larynx. Notice that the trachea is surrounded by cartilage. This helps to keep the airways open. Near the midpoint of the mediastinum, the trachea divides into the primary bronchi. There are 2 primary bronchi, one that enters into each of the lungs. Now it becomes the bronchial tree. The bronchial tree represents the further branching off of the primary bronchi within the lungs. The initial portions of the bronchi all have cartilage around them to prevent their walls from collapsing. As the bronchi become smaller and smaller, eventually we will lose this cartilage. Bronchioles are very small branches that contain no cartilage. They are kept open due to the elasticity of the nearby lung tissue. The smallest of these bronchioles are called the terminal bronchioles. Next are the respiratory bronchioles, which are branches off of the terminal bronchioles. They too have very thin walls. We can see a few capillaries associated with the respiratory bronchioles. This will allow some very limited gas exchange to occur at this level. From the respiratory bronchioles, air enters into alveolar ducts. The ducts deliver air to the alveolar sacs. Alveolar sacs are dead-end pouches that represent the termination of the air passages. They are made up of many alveoli. They provide a very large surface area for gas exchange to occur. The respiratory passages are lined with mucous membranes. We also see cilia on its surface as well. The mucus is secreted by goblet cells as well as glands in the submucosa. Together, the cilia plus the mucus provide a protective function, and we will look in more detail at this function later. Respiration involves 2 movements, inspiration and expiration. The normal amount of air that we inhale and exhale while at rest is approximately 500 milliliters. This is known as the tidal volume. Inhalation is described as being an active process because we must rely on muscle contraction in order to inhale. Inhalation involves the contraction of the diaphragm and also the internal intercostal muscles. When the diaphragm contracts, it will lower. When the internal intercostal muscles contract, they will elevate the ribs. Together, this helps to expand the thoracic wall and increase the volume within the thoracic cavity. The pleural membranes are also attached to the wall as well as to the lung tissue itself. So when the wall expands, it will pull on these membranes, which pull on the lung tissue. As a result, the airways within the lungs also expand. The results of both of these is that the pressure inside the airways will decrease below atmospheric pressure. Now there is very high pressure outside of the lungs and very low pressure inside the thoracic cavity. This will cause air to be forced inward. Gases like to move from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure to try to balance. Expiration, normal resting expiration, is described as being a passive process because no muscle contractions are required. During expiration, the muscles will relax and the elastic recoil of the lung tissue will return them to their normal shape. As a result of both of these, air will be forced out of the lungs. The normal respiration rate is between 10 and 18 breaths per minute. To increase ventilation, or to increase the total volume of air we inhale or exhale, we must increase the rate and the depth of breathing. This is done through respiratory centers that are found in the pons and in the medulla. These will cause the muscles to contract with more force as well as more frequently. To exhale an increasing amount of air above the tidal volume, now we must use muscles, and exhalation will become an active process. We can use both our abdominal muscles as well as our external intercostal muscles. When the abdominal muscles contract, they will push the abdominal visceral upwards to push the diaphragm up even further. When the external intercostal muscles contract, they depress the ribs beyond their normal resting point. This will further decrease the volume inside the lungs and push more air out. Once again, this is referred to as active expiration because it involved muscle contraction. When lung disease interferes with the normal breathing process, we can also use our sternocleidomastoid muscles as well as muscles that help to straighten the vertebral column to help us breathe as well. Next, we will look at oxygen and carbon dioxide gas exchange. This occurs across the respiratory membrane. The respiratory membrane consists of the alveolar wall, which is a layer of simple squamous epithelial tissue, plus the capillary wall, which is also a layer of simple squamous epithelial tissue, plus the basement membrane that lies between them. Altogether, the respiratory membrane is about 0.5 micrometers in thickness. Blood coming from the systemic circulation is very rich in carbon dioxide. It reaches the lungs via the right heart. Pulmonary vessels entering the lungs contain about 100 times more carbon dioxide compared to arterial blood. How is this carbon dioxide transported in the blood? It can be transported in one of three forms. About 25% of the carbon dioxide will be found combined with hemoglobin inside the red blood cells. Carbon dioxide binds to the globin portion of hemoglobin and not the heme. As a result, one hemoglobin molecule can carry both carbon dioxide and oxygen at the same time because they do not compete for the same binding site. The majority of carbon dioxide is carried in the form of bicarbonate ion. When carbon dioxide enters a red blood cell, it combines with water to form carbonic acid. This carbonic acid very quickly dissociates into carbonic acid. The rest of carbon dioxide will be carried as a gas directly dissolved in the water of plasma. How is oxygen transported? Only a very small amount of oxygen will be carried as a dissolved gas. The majority of the oxygen is bound to the iron portion in heme of hemoglobin. There are 4 hemes in hemoglobin, each of which has 1 iron. Therefore, 4 oxygens can be carried on 1 hemoglobin molecule. How does this gas exchange take place? We will first look at what happens in the tissues. Tissues have a very low concentration of oxygen and a high concentration of carbon dioxide compared to the blood. Exchange occurs via diffusion across the capillary membrane to try and balance these pressure differences. Carbon dioxide will move out of the tissues and into the blood, and oxygen will leave the blood and go into the tissues. So we see here with the carbon dioxide will enter into the red blood cell where it very quickly combines with water to form carbonic acid. And this will dissociate into the bicarbonate ion, and this is the way the majority of it will be transferred. In the lungs, the opposite happens. The concentration of oxygen is very high and the concentration of CO2 is very low within the alveoli. As a result, oxygen wants to move into the blood and carbon dioxide wants to be released into the alveolus. What we see happening is this carbonic acid equation will move in the reverse. So carbonic acid will combine with hydrogen to form bicarbonate ion, will combine with hydrogen to form carbonic acid, which very quickly dissociates into carbon dioxide and water. This carbon dioxide will diffuse across the membrane and into the lungs. Our lungs have various defense mechanisms to help to protect us. These not only provide for defense, but they also help to adjust the temperature and the humidity of the air that enters the alveoli. The main respiratory defense mechanism involves the mucous membranes. Our mucous membranes are well supplied with blood vessels. This helps to warm the air that we breathe. The membranes are also covered with a coat of mucus. This helps to trap inhaled particles because they become stuck in this thick coat. Mucus also helps to add humidity to the air that we breathe. The membranes are also covered with cilia. The cilia are continually moving and help to push the mucus and any particles stuck within the mucus out of the respiratory passages and into the oral pharynx. Once in the oral pharynx, this material will be swallowed and then destroyed by the acids in the stomach. The branching of the bronchial tree also acts as a defense. This helps to increase air's exposure to mucus as the tree branches. Air passes through about 16 branches before it finally hits the respiratory bronchioles. We also have nasal hairs within the nose. These too are designed to trap large particles that we inhale. The nasal hairs are also coated with mucus. The nasal hairs are designed to trap the large particles. The cilia are designed to trap medium-sized particles. And then the finer particles will be trapped by macrophages that are found deeper in the lungs. We have alveolar macrophages, which are also known as dust cells. They act to phagocytize fine particles and bacteria within the lungs. These are known as fixed macrophages because they stay within the lungs. They do not have the ability to travel through the body to other areas. Macrophages and the particles that they have ingested will then move with the mucus or are picked up by the lymph system to be cleared away from the body. Anything that will prevent this clearance mechanism will result in hypoventilation, and this may also then result in an increased risk of infection. Secretions in the lungs also have antibacterial and antiviral functions. They contain enzymes that will inhibit bacteria and viruses. The immune system is also very active in the lungs and helps to protect us from infection.